Freedom is the ability to do whatever I want, right? Wrong. In fact, that leads to bondage. Freedom, it turns out, is a very fragile thing. It can only thrive under very specific conditions. Do you know what those conditions are? Understanding them is essential to preserving freedom and to living as a free people. If we fail to do that, we're inevitably going to slide into tyranny and bondage. So, for the sake of our children and grandchildren, we better not fail. We need to understand freedom accurately. Words are precious conveyors of reality. They not only shape the way we think, but they determine our choices and our actions. They shape the kind of cultures that we live in. If you want to change society, you begin by changing language. Our adversary knows this all too well. In recent decades, a strategic redefining of many critical words has led to dramatic changes in our culture for the worse. People have absorbed these false redefinitions uncritically, including many Christians, and in doing so, they've become unwitting agents in advancing non-Christian systems of belief that are tearing our nation apart. This is a disaster for the church and for the society. To turn things around, we have to recover the true definitions of at least 10 key critical words. One of these words is freedom. True freedom is the capacity to self-govern. It's the ability to act according to one's choices within God's created order and under His moral law. It is synonymous with liberty, self-control, and self-government. Words that express the opposite of freedom include bondage, slavery, captivity, imprisonment, subjugation, and oppression. Freedom is very fragile. It can only thrive under certain conditions. One of those conditions is the truth. Lies lead to bondage, but as Jesus said, the truth will set you free. Another condition is a true view of what it means to be human. All people are created by God in His image with God-given rights to life and liberty. God didn't create us to be slaves. He didn't create us as robots. Human beings make free choices, and God holds us responsible and accountable for our moral decisions. Because God made you free, no person, no government, no matter how powerful, has the right to enslave you. Your human rights to life and to liberty are God-given. This is the essential truth that human freedom has to rest upon. Another condition that's necessary for freedom is an accurate view of creation and our place in it. God created a beautiful and an orderly universe that operates according to laws that He established. Now, human freedom isn't limitless, it's bounded. It thrives within the limits that are established by God's laws. So, for example, we might freely choose to jump out of an airplane without a parachute, but that freedom would be short-lived. Why? Because we're bound by the law of gravity. It limits us. And this same thing applies to moral laws, laws that govern what is right and what is wrong, like the Ten Commandments.
From director Cecil B. DeMille.
I will teach thee.
Man shall be ruled by law, not by the will of other men.
Slaves are mine.
The great filmmaker Cecil B. DeMille, the director of that Hollywood classic, The Ten Commandments, understood this well. He said, God did not create man and then, as an afterthought, impose upon him a set of arbitrary, irritating, and restrictive rules. He made man free, and then He gave the commandments to keep him free. Rules or laws make us free? That seems counterintuitive. Don't they restrict our freedom? No, they actually make freedom possible. Consider a game like basketball. It only works when the players agree to a basic set of rules. There's incredible freedom when everyone plays by those rules. But if the players want total freedom, and they ignore the rules and do whatever they want, the game just falls apart, right? Chaos ensues. If we want total freedom to live however we want, the result is going to be chaos. And chaos and freedom don't go together. Freedom requires order. For freedom to flourish, we have to love and to fear God, and we have to do what is right. We have to be hardworking, self-reliant. We have to take responsibility for ourselves and for others. America's founding fathers understood this. Benjamin Franklin once said that only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. If a nation becomes corrupt and vicious, they have need of more masters. And when powerful masters rule over us, we're no longer free, we're slaves. So, put simply, there is no freedom apart from virtue and self-control. But this is a problem, you see, because in our fallen nature, we're generally not virtuous. We're selfish. In the words of the Apostle Paul, we're enslaved to sin. We can't do the good that we want. So how can we be free? Who will rescue us from our bondage to sin? Thanks be to God, who sent His Son Jesus to rescue us from sin and lead us in the way of freedom. Jesus came to do what we could not. He perfectly obeyed God's law on our behalf, and then He paid the penalty for our disobedience on the cross. Now, when we place our faith in Him, He does a remarkable transformation in our hearts. He actually gives us the desire and the strength to become virtuous, self-governing people. That is, people that are capable of living free. In the famous words of John the Apostle, if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. Now, this is fantastic news for people who yearn to be free, because it means that we can rise to our full potential. That's what freedom does. When we're free, we can dream, we can innovate, we can create. We can write novels and poetry, we can form businesses and invent useful products and resources. We can create beautiful art and buildings and architecture. We can build and sustain free nations. What is a free nation? A free nation is a nation with a constitution that acknowledges the equal dignity, worth, and freedom of its citizens. And it secures those fundamental human freedoms, including the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, and the freedom to work and to trade with one another. It secures those freedoms.
Need help tracking down a group of looters. Investigators released new surveillance video showing
looting across Emeryville in San Francisco tonight. KPIX5's Don Lynn.
Back now with a new warning about a surge in organized retail crime. Stores are losing big money, raising prices to cover it, and the greatest cost.
This is the worst nightmare that any community can face.
And yet, tragically today, freedom is eroding in the United States and around the world. We're sliding into tyranny. Why? Because we've redefined freedom. The word freedom means something very different today than what America's founding fathers understood. Today, freedom is license. It's the right to do whatever I want without limit and without restraint. This so-called freedom retains the element of choice, but it strips away the necessity for truth and virtue and self-control. If it feels good, do it, replaces virtue in this false definition of freedom. And self-indulgence replaces self-control. According to this redefinition, we're only free if we reject God and His arbitrary, irritating rules and limits and constraints.
How openly religious they are and their views on contraception and gay marriage and all these other people who use such inflammatory language.
What's the result? Not freedom,
3 people suspected of distributing fentanyl across the
but an ever-growing bondage to the flesh, to our appetites and our desires. And with it, we see skyrocketing rates of drug addiction, soaring crime rates, and family breakdown. All of these are the bitter fruit of this redefined freedom.
everybody's struggling.
Mental health is the existential challenge of our time.
Instead of freedom, we have social chaos, and that's leading to unprecedented levels of depression and suicide. It is ordained in the eternal constitution of things, said the famous British statesman Edmund Burke, that men of intemperate minds cannot be free. Their passions forge their chains. When God is abandoned, freedom ultimately withers and dies. Without God, human beings are reduced to little more than highly evolved animals with no inherent dignity and no God-given rights. The only law is the survival of the fittest. Might makes right. Everything is reduced to power. And if the powerful can strip you of your freedom, if they can enslave you for their benefit, well, then what's to stop them? Without God, tyranny is inevitable. Free nations are the exception in our fallen world. Our default is totalitarianism and empire, where powerful oligarchs and tyrants selfishly exploit the powerless, reducing them to serfs and to slaves. The ominous rise of powerful totalitarian movements in the 21st century show that we're actually returning to this default. We see an alarming rise in powerful global elites exercising their control over the masses through technologically enabled social control and propaganda and censorship. And slavery is on the rise around the world, including sex slavery and the trafficking of children. This is the inevitable result of a horrendous lie. For if people are just animals, as Darwinism asserts, and if I can go and buy and sell a cow or a pig and keep it chained up, why can't I buy or sell a young woman and keep her locked up if I have the power to do so? So, which kind of society do you wish to live in? What understanding of freedom do you want to shape society? This tyranny isn't inevitable. There's still hope to change course, but to do that, we have to recover the true definition of freedom. Words matter. They are powerful. All genuine social change, for better or worse, begins with a shift of language and definitions. God reveals the true definition of freedom in His Word, the Bible. These actual definitions aren't just true for Christians. They're true for everyone. But unless we as Christians know the true definitions and build our lives on them, unless we defend these true definitions in the public square, our societies will be built on false definitions, and we will reap the terrible consequences. So, do you want to be part of upholding and defending the truth about freedom? We can help.